Hey everyone, welcome to the weekend edition of The Bullet for February 11th, 2023. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today on the weekend show, we have next to me on my right, Alex Ooley. He's, of course, of the Forge of Freedom podcast, and he's my guy that joins me every other Friday for the Legal Friday editions of The Bullet. He is an attorney and is in southern Indiana. Below me, Mike Piwowarski, Arms Room Radio. We don't know why he's here, but he keeps showing up. And then down beside Mike, on the bottom right of your screen, Kevin Sona. Kevin is a regional director for Florida Carry. He also is the guy behind the 2A Freedom Fest. And I know I probably got that wrong again, Kevin. But he's behind...
No, you got it right.
He's behind the speakers event that happens every year down in Florida. And we're going to be talking about the news and all that as we get going. But, Kevin, I want to start out. I don't talk about it a ton on the air. I've been down to your event a few times. I actually emceed it last year, or was it last year? The year before. You recently, last weekend, had the 2A Freedom Fest happen again. Tell us a little bit about the event, and if you would, tell us how you got started doing it.
How I got started doing it? Well, it turned out just as a little fellowship with some of our region in Florida and some of our members, just to do a camping, and a gentleman running for a House seat asked if he can come by and say a few words at the event. That's kind of the idea. And as you know, GRPC is an event we all conference, and it's kind of grown into a GRPC, but in the woods, as I say. It's all about education.
And we're having a little bit of issue from breakup from you, but I would be really remiss if I didn't bring up a comment real quick. Riding shotgun with Charlie over on the YouTube side, and I hit the wrong damn button. Kevin Sona coming from the Panhandle of Cast Iron, Florida. Kevin, that's one of your hobbies is getting old cast iron pans and restoring them. How is that your full collection behind you, or is that just a little bit of decoration?
No, that's the skillets that we use pretty much on a daily basis. I have other stuff buried in cabinets and not large and other pans, but I restore some pans for friends and stuff like that. But I'm fun. Just bring back all the old cast iron pieces. They're not.
All right, we're really having issues with your feed, man. It's breaking up really bad. Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Just for my guys on the air with me, your video resolution going back to you is going to go down because I turned it down to minimum just now. We'll see if that clears things up. So, Kevin, tell us about this specifically about this past weekend's event. How did things go, and who did you have down there speaking?
The event went pretty well. We had Gina with the DC Project, Amanda, as you guys all know very well, with the DC Project, and I Am the Target Radio. Dr. Johnny Dean came down. Johnny Dean actually emceed the event. I was going to MC, and I woke up with a massive headache and reached out to John and said, hey, do this. So John was able to pull that off. He did a great job. Collins with the gunfood.com was out there. Who else did we have here? I'm trying to think. Eric Friday, David Katz with Katz and Phillips Law Firm, along with partner James Phillips of the firearm firm. With the event, they donated for the food fund for the camping stuff, so that was great. Rob Morris, as you guys all, I don't think Rob has missed the event. Rob's been to every one except for the first one, I believe. So Rob was out there, and Rob's. I pull up a poll to try to get next year. Rob Campbell does
Yeah.
But I think next year
we're having really bad issues with breakup. Let's go ahead and guys, let's get into the news. Yeah, we're only getting about half what you're saying, bud. Guys, let's go ahead and we're gonna get into news here real quick. First story I've got, and these are all stories that happened this week, so you may have heard me actually do some of this stuff before. First story off CourierJournal.com, saying it violates the Second Amendment rights of gun owners. A federal judge in Kentucky has struck down the law that bans subjects of domestic violence orders from buying or possessing firearms. Advocates for victims of domestic violence say the ruling will put them and others at risk. Quote, research and data clearly demonstrates that domestic violence and guns are a lethal combination, the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence said in a statement. When people who commit domestic violence have access to firearms, the lethality risk increases by 1,000% for survivors, their families, and for community members. Baloney! I'm sorry, was that external? Jefferson County Attorney Michael Connell, whose office handles nearly 4,000 domestic violence calls a year, calls the ruling a disservice to victims and public safety. For now, the decision is only binding in the Eastern District of Kentucky, where Reeves sits, but can be cited anywhere. Alex, you're our attorney. I'm going to start with you. This almost it almost exactly copies the decision out of the Fifth Circuit about a week and a half ago. Is there any new news in this one?
I haven't heard any new news on this one. In fact, this article was just published February 10th. I understand from the article, too, that there was a decision, or actually rather a case in the Western District of Kentucky. So this case was in the Eastern District, but there was one in the Western District where a man was sentenced to a year in prison for violating the same statute. So you've got some difference here among the different districts just within Kentucky. But I think this is the right decision, as the opinion in Texas in the Fifth Circuit said. You know, the Supreme Court in Bruin said we can't have these balancing tests, these analysis of firearms restrictions under this sort of balancing analysis. And that's clearly what's going on here, where courts uphold these domestic violence prohibitions with respect to firearms, because they're saying, listen, we have to take away these people's firearms rights because there's a good reason to do it, because there's a public interest, because there's a compelling reason to do so. And the Supreme Court in Bruin said we can't engage in that sort of analysis. Where there's a restriction on the right to keep and bear arms, is there text, history, and tradition to support that restriction? And there's not with these sort of restrictions that we're talking about here in the Eastern District of Kentucky or from the Fifth Circuit. So I think this is the right decision. And the court in Bruin said, listen, the balancing was done at the time that the Second Amendment was adopted. The public did the balance of interest at that time. And if people want to amend the Constitution, we can certainly do that. But you can't just take it away because there's some supposed good reason to do so.
All right, Mike. You've been unusually quiet today. I'm gonna lean on you next. What's your thoughts on this one, bud?
You know, there are two cases out of Kentucky with this, and a couple of points to clarify up front is this is not someone that used a firearm to commit a crime. Okay, the crime that they were charged with for both of them was the possession of the firearm while under the domestic violence restrictions. So that was there. One of these individuals actually went on a shooting spree and attempted murder charges and everything else, and all those charges still stand against him. But the one where a possession of the firearm while a domestic violence under a domestic violence injunction or an order, that was the one that was tossed out. So he's still facing all the other charges with the firearm. So they narrowly took the focus on this, that you can't go ahead and charge someone with possession of a firearm when they're only accused of a crime, as opposed to having been convicted of a crime, or you're banned from carrying the firearm. The other one that was interesting about it is that you've got an individual who was already convicted of this crime, and I'm curious to see Alex's response on this one. He was already convicted of the crime, so they went back and looked at the old conviction, applying the new standard of Bruin, because it had been in appeal. So it had already been in appeal when Bruin had come out. So they at that point they set it back and then re-examined the appeal under the Bruin standard and found that the conviction should never have taken place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Mike. And the Supreme Court, they GVR'd, granted review, vacated, and remanded certain decisions from the courts of appeals to review those cases and come to a new conclusion based on the standards set forth in Bruin. And that's basically what was going on here, except it wasn't the Supreme Court sending it back. It was at lower level courts of appeals. But that's essentially what was going on. Said, hey, you need to retake another look at this because there's this new standard that we're operating under, or at least a clarified standard from Bruin.
And I think that's probably the biggest part of this now. Now, again, it's only in the Western and Eastern District of Kentucky. I'm sure it'll have to move higher, or before it moves left and right. It could still be cited in other cases, but it's not law of the land. It's only a law of the land in Kentucky at the moment. But now here's your ability to go back and examine cases that were wrongfully convicted based on old standards before Bruin come out. So now we're delving into we can go re-examine the old cases as well. Things that occurred prior to the Bruin ruling are now subject to the Bruin ruling. That's a big step. That's a big step, and it's going to be fun to watch a lot of people apply now. And we know, like, let's use drug cases for instance. If you're convicted of a possession of marijuana and you get sentenced to 10 or 20 years, which we know there's a lot of people out there that are, and now marijuana turns legal, they don't go back and let them out. They don't go back and re-examine. They were sentenced to a crime as the crime was committed under the law back then. In this case, they're saying the standard for that conviction with the firearm was wrong, and they will be going back to look at those cases.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's an important point, and especially not with. So you mentioned marijuana. There's another decision I think we're going to talk about later today. Yeah. People who possess firearms who are users or addicted to marijuana, right? So I think the same sort of analysis would take place there, not just with respect to these domestic violence orders for people who have been subject to those right, and prohibited from carrying or possessing a firearm. But the other point I want to bring up too with respect to this decision is that oftentimes these protective orders are issued without a right to an attorney, with very little due process, and so people are deprived of the right to keep and bear arms based on flimsy allegations oftentimes, and judges are reluctant to deny protective orders because they don't want somebody to get hurt and for people to look at them like they have blood on their hands. So I think this decision is a good one for that reason as well, because people are being deprived of their fundamental liberties without much due process, and that's clearly not consistent with the decision in Bruin.
I got one more question for you, Alex. We've talked many times about how Supreme Court takes cases, and often what will happen is there will be a split in the circuits. The Fifth Circuit will rule one way, the Ninth Circuit will rule another way, and that will doesn't require, but it encourages the Supreme Court to take it. Is it the same way within the districts? Kentucky is in the Sixth Circuit. Since there's apparently on the Eastern District of Kentucky, there's one decision going one way, western side, there's a decision going the other way. Is this likely to get kicked up to the Sixth Circuit?
I would think so. So the decision in the Western District, that was a conviction, but I don't believe that case had been appealed yet. But if the conviction in the Western District is appealed, and there's a disagreement between the districts, then the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is more likely to take that because there's disagreement among its subsidiary districts. So it works basically the same way. The Sixth Circuit would prioritize cases where there's disagreement among the districts.
All right, Kevin, let's see how your connection is doing. Do you want to chime in on this one, man? And I think Kevin totally froze up. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one then. Where are we at? I even lost my place in Showmo notes trying to get some things. This one off Kansas Reflector. I believe, Mike, you and I talked about this one on Thursday. Advocates for implementing a statewide gun safety program in Kansas public schools urged the Senate to get behind a bill requiring the Kansas State Board of Education to establish curriculum guidelines for instruction of students from kindergarten through high school. A comparable bill approved by the 2021 legislature and vetoed by Governor Laura Kelly also drew upon the Eddie Eagle initiative offered through the NRA for children in kindergarten through 8th grade. Students in 8th through 12th grades would be eligible for a firearm training program coordinated by the Kansas Department of Welfare and Wildlife and Parks. This is Senate Bill 116 in Kansas. If you are watching and you are in the state of Kansas, that's the one you want to call your senators and representatives and tell them to support. Alex, you didn't get it. This wasn't on your day, but this is really one of our dreams, is that children get exposed to gun safety, real gun safety, from kindergarten up through 8th grade, and then from 8th grade through graduation, they get a chance to participate in real firearms training. And I don't want to say Eddie Eagle isn't real, but they get to work with real firearms and real firearm safety. Well, what's your thought on this one, bud?
Yeah, so I think so often kids these days, they're sort of shielded from things that we consider to be dangerous, or that a lot of people consider to be dangerous. But the world is a dangerous place, and they shouldn't just be isolated or put in a bubble. They need to be taught personal responsibility, and that means whether it's with guns, firearms, or anything else for that matter. They need to be taught that these aren't scary things, that they're things that you have to be responsible with, you have to be safe with. And I think that training at an early age is a great thing. So they're not taught to be afraid of these things. They're taught that they can be a tool, that there are things that if you handle safely and responsibly, that they can enhance your life and be an important asset in your life, especially when you become an adult. So I think that these sorts of programs are great. And I think one thing it says in this article, somebody who was speaking out against the program says, let's be honest. We know why we're choosing the NRA's program. That's the Eddie Eagle program. It's not about gun safety. It's about promoting the NRA to young kids. So when they grow up, they say, oh, Eddie Eagle, I remember him. You want to indoctrinate young kids into loyal NRA supporters. And I think that's clearly not what's going on here. And I think one thing I'd like to point out about the NRA that a lot of people don't know is that the NRA started as a training organization. A lot of people know about it as a lobbying organization and criticize it as a lobbying organization. But to this day, they have a very significant training arm, and they started as a training organization after the Civil War by some officers who were not satisfied with the marksmanship of soldiers during the Civil War. So that training mission has carried on through today, and it starts with children and teaching children how to be around firearms safely, how to handle firearms safely, and what to do so that we don't raise a generation of children who become scared and irresponsible adults.
All right, Mike, we covered this on Thursday. Any new thoughts or anything you want to bring up again?
No, agreed. You know, of course, with most everything Alex said, I did just hear from Kevin. He said he's having some thunderstorms where he is, so his connection might be in and out. He'll try reconnecting with you when he has the opportunity.
Sure.
Here on the program today, just so everybody's aware. Yeah, this is great. This is great. This is back in the schools, right? That's where we want it. This is the opportunity to not teach, and this is the important part. We're not teaching, a toddler militia here. We're not sending kids out to learn to be marksmen, to shoot, to kill. We're teaching firearms safety, and in many cases that doesn't include shooting. That is just, listen, if you come across the firearm, how to respond to the firearm. If the friend brings the firearm out, you find the firearm in the bushes on the way to school, that kind of thing. This is about preventing accidents. That's what this is about. This is not training your kids to go out and be marksmen and snipers. Now, is it a baseline? Is it a ground level for that? If that's a sport they decide they want to get into, absolutely it is. But you know what? In the state of Kansas, they still have that. You could be on a team, a marksmanship team there in the school. So this is good to see, and I want to stress the importance. And that's also Eddie the Eagle and NRA's importance is the safety around the firearms to prevent accidents from happening.
Well, I want to get a comment in here, and then I'm going to go off on my comment. Safety with guns is not safety from guns. Basically, 500 Magnum, and he sent a clarification, A, not R. But one thing that Alex was really good about bringing up is that the other side thinks this is indoctrination. Yeah, well, so is you can't mention guns. Guns are unless you can say that guns are evil. That's the only way guns can be mentioned. Is that not indoctrination? Goes both ways, and I'm sure y'all would agree with me that look, Eddie Eagle is a real simple. Stop, run away. I'm sorry, it's been a very long time. Stop, don't touch, run away, tell an responsible adult. Four parts to it. Really, for somebody who hasn't had a stroke, easy to remember off the top. But this is not, and they don't actually get into live fire until 8th grade, and generally, going back to, I started school at 6, so 6 plus 8 is 14. You're 14 to 15 years old before you get into the hunter safety education part of it, or the live fire part of it. And if it's like it was when I was in school, when you do get into hunter safety and the using of firearms, they're air pellet guns, which can still be a bit dangerous, but it's not like they're firing 30-06s. I think it's a great bill myself. I think the kickback from it is somewhat to be expected, but it's not serious.
Yeah, and the kickback, it's not critical of the content of the education, like you were saying, Paul. That nobody's saying that what the Eddie Eagle program teaches is inappropriate. The main criticism here is because it's an NRA program, and simply because it's an NRA program, we shouldn't allow it into our schools. And it's about firearms, but the content of the education, they're not being critical of it because, like you said, it's a pretty simple message, and it's one that every child should learn. Cool. Paul, can you hear me? I lost your audio.
Yeah, Paul, we've lost your audio there.
All right, how's that now?
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, I had myself muted. Get this one in here quick. 500 Magnum changing the subject on us a little bit. Newsom called the 2A suicide package, the 2A a suicide package. How convenient for a guy that has 24/7 armed security. And it's okay if he just doesn't want you to have them. Sounds like government, all right. Yeah, we haven't talked about this at all on the show. Newsom saying the Second Amendment is a suicide pact. It's a new approach, but I don't think he's got anything there. Either of you guys want to chime in?
Yeah, Paul, we did talk about this earlier in the week. Well, Gavin Mussolini, not just this particular issue. You remember when he had the shootings there 2 weeks ago? He stood right there in front of the TV cameras and said he supports the Second Amendment. He just wants all the provisions on the end of it. Clearly, again, this guy is, as two-faced as you can get. How many times we got to watch this guy under COVID lay the rules down and then decide he doesn't have to, they don't pertain to him, and he can go to events and he can have dinners and go wherever he wants to. It's the same thing applies with the Second Amendment. Just like the comment said, he's got people surrounding him 24/7 armed with firearms, yet those that don't have his elite status are not allowed to protect themselves. I think anything that comes out of this guy's mouth, we just have to understand is his personal agenda or the party's personal agenda, and has nothing to do with the safety of the people in California.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And let's. What would be now? He's for the Second Amendment, but he wants this and that and the other restriction. I think where he'd be happy to end with is every private citizen is allowed to own a BB gun, not a pellet gun, a BB gun that is single shot. You can't load more than one BB at a time, and you can't have it anywhere other than in the bedroom of your house, and then only if you're alone in the bedroom.
Yeah, and it can't look scary because it's not allowed to look scary. So if it looks like something else, you're not allowed to own it.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but I talked about this recently on the Forge of Freedom about at the time of the founding when the Constitution was adopted, there was this debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists about whether or not a Bill of Rights was appropriate. And the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, as an example, didn't want a Bill of Rights because he thought, why would we say that certain rights are protected when the government has no authority in the first place to restrict those rights? And by naming certain rights, that gives some sort of presumption that the government had the authority to restrict them in the first place. But the Anti-Federalists insisted that we have the Bill of Rights and that we have certain fundamental rights explicitly protected. And that's how we got the first 10 amendments, including the Second Amendment. And it's for exactly this sort of reason, because politicians like Gavin Newsom want to take away our rights, and whether or not the government or the Constitution actually grants them the authority to do so, they will read into the general powers of the Constitution to extend their authority as far as they can. And without the Second Amendment, without the First Amendment, without those first 10 amendments, it's hard to imagine what sort of restrictions we might be living under without those.
Let's go ahead and, yeah, I don't want to go too deep down a rabbit hole. I want to get to, and we do have Alex alluded to this earlier, we do have a story about marijuana, this one off Breitbart.com. U.S. District Judge Patrick Wyrick dismissed an indictment against Gerald Michael Harrison, holding the statute to relied upon to ban gun ownership by marijuana users is unconstitutionally vague, in violation of the Due Process Clause, and unconstitutionally infringes on his fundamental right to possess a firearm in violation of the Second Amendment. Harrison was indicated, that says indicated, but I'm sure it's indicted by a federal grand jury on August 17th, 2022 for possessing a firearm while being an unlawful user of marijuana. with 18 U.S. Code 922 G3 being relied upon in the indictment. In applying Bruin, Weyrich pointed out the question here is whether stripping someone of their right to possess a firearm solely because of the marijuana is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. If it is not, then 922 G3 cannot be constitutionally applied to Harrison, no matter the reasonableness of the policy it embodies. Alex, this closely resembles a Fifth Circuit decision. Again, Fifth Circuit is being really active, and I'm really glad for it, but can they just bring South Dakota in with Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana? Because I want this applied here too. What's your thoughts on this one, Alex?
Yeah, so this is a decision out of the Western District of Oklahoma, which I believe is in the 10th Circuit. And it's an important decision for a few reasons. Number one, it prohibits, so this 18 USC 922 G3 bans the possession, so not carrying, not receiving, but more broadly, the possession of a firearm. So even in your own home, you couldn't possess a firearm under federal law if you're an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance, including marijuana. And what's important about that is a few things. Number one, this statute wasn't adopted until 1968, which we know from the Bruin decision and from other decisions is not a period of history that we look to when we look at the text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment, as we learned in Bruin. We look to the founding era, the time when the Second Amendment was adopted. What was the meaning of the Second Amendment? What sorts of restrictions were in place or would have been appropriate at the time of the founding under the original meaning and understanding of the Second Amendment? So clearly a statute adopted in 1968 wouldn't fall into that text, history, and tradition of the Second Amendment. At most anti-gun advocates are looking to the Reconstruction era after the Civil War when they want to look to more recent history regarding gun control, but certainly not 1968, which is very recent in terms of the history of the Second Amendment. So it's important for that reason. But the opinion also points out that when somebody is intoxicated, because this is one of the arguments that was brought up, that people even around the time of the founding would have been prohibited from possessing a firearm while they were intoxicated. But that was just during the brief period of intoxication, and it only prohibited them from carrying. It wasn't an outright ban on anybody who used alcohol, and it wasn't a ban on possession. It was a ban on carrying. So I think that this decision is important for a lot of those reasons, and the opinion is really well written. It's over 50 pages, and the judge goes through the analysis in light of Bruin very thoroughly.
All right, Mike, you're up next, man. What are your thoughts on this one?
Kind of like Alex said, the important part to understand here for those that are out there in states that allow it and marijuana, possession, and you get your, whether it's open use or you get your medical marijuana card. This case was about the ownership of the firearm, So the judge said that you cannot ban the ownership of the firearm if they happen to be a marijuana user. Now, you listen, in some states it might be lawful, but we know still federally it's going to be unlawful. So when we're referring to it under U.S. code, it's the unlawful use of marijuana. So if you use marijuana, it doesn't matter what your state law says, the feds still consider you an unlawful user. Well, and that's what this is. Even when you take a look at a 4473 and it asks you, are you the unlawful user? Like Alex said with the comparisons to alcohol, they're worried about your state of mind at the moment, right? That's, what's your state of mind at the moment? They wouldn't sell a gun to a drunk. So if you come in high, they're not going to sell you a gun also. This doesn't mean, and this is the clarification in here, that if you happen to have a marijuana card, you unlawfully use marijuana according to the federal standards, that they can come to your house and take away your firearms for ownership. This has more to do with the everyday possession and use of, and I know possession can cross that line both ways for ownership and use, but when you take a look at most of the criminal statutes, you possession gets from state to state different terminology. You know, there's regular possession, constructive possession. It's in the safe possession. I own the house. This has to do with the use and control of the firearm. And what the judges said here, the ownership of the firearm should not be in jeopardy if you're an unlawful user of marijuana.
Yeah, 100%. I want to bring up. And last time when it was covered, I took us down a rabbit hole. We may go down a rabbit hole again. We still got 25 minutes left in the show. We've got time for a little bit of a rabbit hole here. Personally, I equate marijuana and alcohol the same way. I'm not against whatever you want to put in your body. Look, it's your body, your decision. I really don't care myself. I'd really prefer if you can feel the effects up here that you're not carrying, whether it be alcohol, whether it be marijuana, whether it be whatever you put in your body. If it alters you up here, I'd prefer you don't carry. I don't think there should be a law against it.
Yeah, Paul, you know, with the comparison you and I make a lot here, I will say the same thing, that for now that we know with the medical studies that marijuana and alcohol have many similarities. In fact, some will say that alcohol is much worse. But as long as the law is the law, when it concerns, you know, the federal standard for marijuana, we need to obey the law. Now, it's great that we've gotten a good interpretation from this judge as opposed to, again, the use of the firearm as opposed to the ownership of the firearm. And listen, it's the law. Don't go out there and jeopardize yourself, and unless you want to be the test case. And the comparison you and I make, Paul, all the time is, you know, I'm pretty much an absolutist with firearms. I think I should be able to, you know, order an Abrams tank on Amazon and have it, you know, delivered to my house. But in the meantime, I'm not behind the 7-Eleven trying to make an Abrams deal, okay? I'm still obeying the law as we have it, so I get to continue to exercise the rights that I have. And so that's what I'd caution people. You read stuff like this, you know, don't get high at the range to celebrate, all right? You know, let's be smart about it.
Yeah. And last I checked, there weren't any marijuana dispensaries inside the range anyway, so, you know.
I'll botch this quote, but this discussion reminds me a little, and your comments, Paul, especially remind me of this quote that basically the limit of my outstretched arm ends where your nose begins. And that's part of the problem with lots of laws, is that we are restricting things that are not necessarily immoral, and that it sort of violates this concept of self-ownership. And, you know, you said you don't care what people put in their bodies as long as you don't hurt me, right? And so I think that's where we go astray with so many laws, especially laws related to drugs. But the idea is, as long as you're not hurting someone else, that's where whatever you do with your own body is totally up to you.
Well, that's the double-edged part of the narcotics use, though, right? Isn't it? It's I use the narcotics, it only harms myself. Well, now I have to go to the hospital for an overdose, and perhaps my kid doesn't get the treatment they need because they're dealing with the overdose guy who's only affecting himself. We know from, and I know from a career in it, that, you know, listen, and I'm not talking about a marijuana user or somebody that has it under control, but when you start getting into other drugs beyond that people will start to commit crimes to facilitate their drug use, and now you're involving other people in your personal use. So, and I think that's just that's a line there that is nowhere near black and white, and I think that's part of the argument that we see from people here. And again, not that I'm leaning one way or the other with that, but if you start to consume alcohol, even alcohol, you have alcohol poisoning and I go to the hospital, you know, listen, now I don't have insurance or whatever, you know, because I'm drinking too much alcohol. I don't have a job. I lost my job. Your insurance rates at the hospital go up now because the guy next to you doesn't have insurance. It's not a simple answer to a complicated problem.
You're absolutely
I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole that we talked about here, but I think that there's some parallel here with gun prohibitions. And that whenever you prohibit a substance, whether it's firearms or drugs, you inevitably are going to create a black market for that drug or that gun. And
yes,
we saw that with the prohibition of alcohol. When alcohol prohibition existed, what did we have? We had Al Capone We had Bugs Moran. We had the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. We had the beginning of gun control in 1934. So prohibition led to some of the first instances of gun control, and it all stemmed from this sort of black market for drugs and alcohol, black market for guns. And I think that that's the problem, right? When you start prohibiting items rather than conduct, you go down this slippery slope of, what stops us from prohibiting sugar or soda beverages out of large soda beverages out of a soda fountain. And I think there's this danger of going down this slippery slope, whether it's guns, drugs, food, etc. And that's just not the province of government, at least as it was originally imagined by the founders and the drafters of the Constitution.
Well, and I agree, and only because, Paul, you said we had some time to hit the rabbit hole. Alex, I agree. I just there's got to be that line somewhere, and I don't know where the line is. I have no idea. Is it sugar? Is it caffeine? Is it alcohol? Is it opioids? Is it fentanyl? When it starts to, remember, my rights end when they start to infringe on somebody else's. And if I'm out there, dropping fentanyl tablets off to people, doesn't that, infringe on other people's? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I know that we're still searching for it, and I appreciate the parallel with firearms as well. It's just this is a discussion to be had. That's all.
Sure. And now I want to go back to Alex saying, where do we, ban sodas? Remember, about 10 to 15 years ago was when Mike Bloomberg was the mayor of New York. They tried to ban big gulps. You could only get big gulp if you were getting a diet soda. You couldn't get a regular soda because of the sugar. And that didn't work so well. So, and historically, all bans on possession of items have failed. There's never been one that's been successful that I can think of. And viewers, listeners, if you can think of one, hit the comments, let me know. And by the way, I don't think I brought this up at the beginning of the show. We only seem to be getting comments from YouTube, so if you're watching on the Polite Society Podcast Facebook page, you can comment on that live video. And if you're watching YouTube, of course, you can comment on that video. If you're watching us anywhere else, go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet. My software will pick that up just as quickly as the others. So I want to get, speaking of rabbit holes, we're going to go down a little bit of a different trail of a rabbit hole. This one, 500 Magnum is taking us down. He says, if 9mm, let me go back to his first comment. I about fell out of my chair laughing when Biden said 9mm blows lungs out of the body. Dear God, nobody tell him about 500 Smith & Wesson. And then, where are we at here? There we go. If 9mm blows lungs out, then 500 Magnum hits harder than a nuclear explosion. The president obviously is a good example of somebody who doesn't know anything about what they're trying to regulate.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, in his mental state, we should probably restrict his firearm use also.
Alex, you got anything on this?
Yeah, I think obviously he doesn't know anything about it, or if he does, he's being willfully ignorant, at least in the eyes of the public. But I think the simplest answer is generally the best answer, right? That's the Occam's razor, and that's just that he doesn't know. And that's the danger with so many politicians. Is they want to regulate things and to look like they're doing something. And we talked a little bit about this last night, Paul. They want to appease the voters by saying, here's this problem, and we did something about it. Whether or not it's the right thing to do is beside the point. And that's classic example of that with Biden.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to get one more in here that's going to take us down yet another rabbit hole for a few minutes. But I don't expect this one to take us a huge long time. Mike, you and I discussed this yesterday. 500 Magnum also says if DeSantis wants to run for president in 2024, it would be in his best interest to sign constitutional carry this year. Well, I'm going to say 500 Magnum. First, he's got to get the bill on his desk. And that's not a certainty yet. I still think Nebraska may beat them to 26. We'll see. But Mike, we talked about this a little bit Thursday. There's good pro-gun people, good pro-freedom people who are fighting against the bill in Florida right now because they say it doesn't do enough good. It's not perfect permitless carry. Your thoughts on this, man?
Yeah, I think I said the other day the same quote. It makes me want to bang my head against the wall when I listen to these people. Paul, we're both absolutists, right? I want to get an M240 Bravo out of a vending machine. That should be my right to do so. But until that day happens, I'm going to go through the proper channels to get one, if possible, because you can still own a machine gun. Maybe not a 240. That's a post-86 weapon, but I get an M60 if I wanted to and had the cash. Let's take what we can get. Let's take what we can get. We've been without since 1986 here in this state. Let's take what we can get. This is, I guess, the most accurate way to describe it is this is going to be permitless concealed carry. Really, nothing else changes in the law. Let's take that. All right, those that are coming up and wasting the government's time and wasting everybody's time up there in the legislature with their we want 100% or we want nothing at all. You're fools. I'm sorry, and I would say that to your face as well. You've said things. I've seen the comments that say if the governor votes for this, then I'm not voting for the governor. Oh, okay, take the pieces back that we can get. They didn't take all of our gun rights. It may seem like it. They may take all of our gun rights overnight. It's going to take more than overnight to get them back. We'll take them back one at a time as we can get them. You see this happening in Texas recently as well, where they passed their constitutional carry, which wasn't a true constitutional carry, but since the year and a half that they've already passed it, they've already grabbed more rights back to go with it. That will be the method. If you sit down and say, I want 100%, I want nothing, I hope you sit on nothing all day long and enjoy it.
Yeah, let me, Alex, do you want to chime in quick?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this with respect to NAGR a few weeks ago, Paul, that oftentimes they take a position, and I don't know that NAGR is involved in Florida at all in speaking out against this proposal, but oftentimes they take a position against a pro-gun legislation because it's not perfect. But we need to move in the right direction. And creating sound bites, doing fundraising, opposing legislation that isn't perfect is not helping any of us. We're losing our rights little by little, death by 1,000 cuts. We need to get them back in the same way. Obviously, we'd rather take big steps forward, but we need to seize the opportunity to take small steps when we can.
Absolutely. 500 Magnum comes back again. You should be able to buy a Gatling gun at the grocery store. Not only that, I ought to be able to, and this is going to shock a few people, maybe not, but I think it may. My real opinion is you could own warships, the full ship, including cannon, when the Second Amendment was adopted. My opinion, you ought to be able to go to a real estate agent and buy one of these abandoned missile silos with the missile still in it and take possession of it. Good question. Good question. Pete over at Gun Websites. Are people.orgs opposing the bill looking for perfect rights, or are they looking for publicity and funding for themselves? I think Pete hit the nail on the head there. I think that this is, they can go and say, this is what we pushed for. We didn't get it, but we pushed for it, and trying to get money from gun rights supporters.
Which is good. Listen, everybody needs more money to fight the fight against the evil, but the comments that are coming out of there is, if again what I saw was if you senator, representative, governor, vote for this. We won't be voting for you anymore. All right, that's a line in the sand right there, and that's going to cause harm to the effort to get back our Second Amendment rights. Let's look at all those people, and let's talk about all those people out there that didn't vote for the mean orange man because he had bad tweets. Look what we're in now, Paul. I hope those people are happy, and this is the same type of scenario. It's not exactly 100% what I want, so I'm going to go vote third party or whatever. I know I'm going to sit here sucking for 4 years, because I got to listen to the mental patient in chief up there talk about taking away my assault weapons again.
Yeah, I will say this. For me personally, this is a very productive time of year. I wouldn't have as much to talk about if we had somebody that liked freedom in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. So personally, yeah, I got a lot to talk about now. I don't have to work as hard to find things to talk about, but I'd really rather have the freedom.
True.
We rabbit holed for over 10 minutes on the last several. I want to get one more story in here, possibly two. Next one, this is off Marini, MARINII.com. Despite outrage over a cycle of deadly mass shootings in California and other states, a new poll out Monday has found plummeting support for a national assault weapon ban, reflecting what even backers say may be a growing pessimism over whether such a law would reduce violence. President Joe Biden and Governor Gavin Newsom have called for a ban, and California Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced a new bill last month, similar to one Congress allowed to expire after 10 years in 2004. California has banned the sale of assault weapons since 1989, but it is under legal challenge. While Biden has undertaken a new push to ban assault weapons, public views on that issue are now closely divided, said Gary Langer of Langer Research Associates, which produced the survey for ABC News, neither one of which are decidedly pro-gun, and asked their opinion regarding the proposed legislation. 51% of the respondents said they were opposed, 47 were in support. The same poll had been conducted 22 times in 13 years, starting in 1995, and noted that in most other polls, people supported such a measure, peaking at 79% in 1999. Support was at 62% as recently as 2018, but fell to 56% with 41 opposed in September of 2019, the last time the firm asked. So now, as of February of 2023, we're down to a majority oppose it, a minority, a slim one, but a minority are for it. Is this the case of the public getting smarter, or is this the case of, look, we just went through 2 years of lockdowns, 2 years of riots, 2 years of really nasty stuff, and we now know we are the only ones that are going to be able to protect ourselves. The police may not be coming at all if you live in Detroit, or they may take a very long time to get there if you live anywhere else. Alex, I'm going to start with you. Do you think this is the public smartening up, or do you think maybe it's the media losing its effectiveness?
Well, I think they're not mutually exclusive, right? I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, look, I think a lot of people, like you said, with the riots and the looting and the lockdowns, that people realize that they're their own last line of defense, and that these so-called assault weapons, the propaganda term for these semi-automatic rifles, are often the most effective means of protecting themselves and their families. And I mean, another example is you look at Ukraine, and they're trying to pass out rifles to their own citizens over there to protect themselves from foreign invaders. And that's really one of the main reasons for the Second Amendment in the first place, right? To protect ourselves from our own government and to protect ourselves from foreign invasion. And so I think that people are wising up. I think the media is losing its effectiveness. And I think the narrative against so-called assault weapons is dwindling.
All right. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, this is clearly a left Democrat poll that was put out, and even with their horrible questioning in the poll, and then listen, if you let me write a poll, Paul, I'll get people to say that they 90% agree with aliens coming back to run the country because they're already here. It's just a matter how you word it when you present it to people. We've all seen that done a million times. We know how polls are. Just look at what happened with the Trump and Clinton polls. But even so, even with the bias written into this poll, we're still only a 4% spread on the the ban of assault weapons, like Alex said, the media term for it. This is, it's if you realize what the poll is, this is great news for us. This means even with the media brainwashing, that people are coming the other way around. Just like the both of you have said, it's based on what's gone on around us in the past couple of years that people realize now. Sometimes protecting themselves comes down to themselves protecting themselves.
And one more thing I want to bring up is this, and that is that on this, as you pointed out, this is a fairly liberal polling organization for a very liberal news outlet. I think the public support may be even further against, the public's opinion against an assault weapon ban, maybe even fairly stronger than this. So.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like I said, this was a biased poll, and there was only a 4% spread on that. Let's have an honest poll out there, and I think you'll see the more accurate number might be even below a quarter of the population that are even entertaining that idea anymore.
Well, and I'm going to rabbit hole again, although we're coming up on time. We're looking seriously on the federal level at the president wants to ban all if the president got his goal, all semi-automatic firearms would be gone as soon as the legislation could get to him. That's right. That's not going to happen, but I think the people are getting sick and tired of this, and our show is growing. Mike, Arms Room Radio, and the Reload scene, or not the Reload, the your show you do with Craig.
Rundown.
Jeez, my brain. It seems to be growing. Alex has got the new Forge of Freedom podcast that is doing very well. Anti-rights people are losing, and the freedom-loving people are winning. And I want to get one comment in, then we got to start shutting this down. Pete over at Gun Websites says, for what it's worth, we have 18 Titan IIs in Tucson. Intercontinental ballistic missile fuel is nasty stuff. You would not want to be responsible for tens of thousands of gallons of dinitrogen tetroxide, the fuel. I do not doubt that at all, Gun Websites. I still think it should be my right to decide if I want to do that. So, Big John 410. Quick, warn all the FUDs, they are now coming for their semi-automatic assault 1911s. It may have won 2 world wars, but it won 2 world wars. Why should the people be able to have that? So, all right, guys, we are coming up on the top of the hour here. I'm going to start. Alex, if you would, tell us about Forge of Freedom podcast. Tell them about your training company. Anything else you want to plug, bud?
Yeah, so I just started a new podcast at the beginning of the year, the Forge of Freedom podcast. As a lot of listeners know, I'm an attorney and a firearms instructor, but that's not where my passion really lies. I care about the law, I care about firearms and our right to keep and bear arms, but I care about freedom more broadly. And on the podcast, we talk about why freedom. Why should we care about freedom? What's the philosophy behind freedom? And I talk about what sort of impact that has on a lot of the topics we talk about day to day. How does that philosophy affect our views of the war on drugs, of qualified immunity, of assault weapons bans, so-called? And so that's really what the podcast is about. It's the name of it stems from this idea that we don't get freedom from government. They don't give us the right to keep and bear arms. Government is simply meant to protect that right that we already had, and that freedom is won on the individual level through education, through personal responsibility. So we talk a lot about the philosophy of freedom, but also sort of more practical ways that you can build freedom in your life. So I'm excited about that project. We've got 5 episodes out now, and we'll be releasing an episode weekly.
Very cool. Mike, Arms Room Radio coming up here in just a little bit. And anything else you want to plug, bud?
Yeah, hit that armsroomradio.com at 3 p.m. Eastern Time today. 2 hours of informative and entertaining Second Amendment commentary, firearms commentary. And then, of course, we do the rundown during the week at 5 p.m. Eastern Time with co-host Craig DeLuz. And, Paul, I know you mentioned your stroke earlier. You seem to be doing fine, and also we know you're at least qualified to be the senator from Pennsylvania, so you'll be okay.
Maybe I should declare my candidacy right now, 6 years down the road. You know,
do it. Absolutely.
5 years down the road, I guess is the actual election. So I would first have to move to Pennsylvania, though.
Yeah, not until the day before the election. You'll be fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. See how the polling goes first. Yeah.
And if you live in Pennsylvania and you want to be able to own your own private missile silo, I'm the guy you want to vote for. That's going to do it for broadcasting for me this week. Thank you, everybody who's listened to the podcast, who's joined us live, especially to those who've commented. Thank you all. It really makes the show better. Join us next week. Next week, by the way, the last full week of broadcasts for the Bullet, Monday through Friday. There will be no show 1 week from today. I'm traveling to the U.S. Virgin Islands on that day. No show 2 weeks from today. I'll be flying back. So next week, Monday through Friday, come join me. We'll talk about the news of the day. And until then, everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next.